Can you hear us?
Yes, indeed. Wonderful. Wonderful to have you participating. Yay.
Thank you for waiting for us. We're ready to start whenever
Oh.
our opponents are. Are you guys ready?
I think they're waiting for a few more people who have class ending at 3:30. How many people and please pronounce the name of your school, because I have a pronunciation in my head that's probably wrong. So I'd like to hear yours, and then I'll know to say it right, I hope.
Well, we pronounce our school, or theirs? Wait.
Our school.
Our school?
No, your school in Texas.
Our school. We pronounce it Del Valle High School.
Del Valle. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Cool. Great. Well, it's nice to. Is it just the two of you debating?
Well, we're also waiting on some people because passing periods class just ended, and we're just waiting for the class to fill.
Okay, so this works out then. My preference is to try to wait until everybody that's going to be on hand is on hand. I don't want to wait for another 20 minutes for that, but we can certainly do another 5 or so.
Okay.
Have you enjoyed
perfect.
the preparation?
Thank you.
And this is good. It's good to get our audio checks out of the way. We've already had a little bit of conversation with the 2 young ladies from Woodford County in London. So we know we have good audio from them. They will be using a PowerPoint as part of their presentation. So we already know that that works as well.
Okay. Well, luckily we're only doing oral presentations, so unfortunately we're not going to have any like PowerPoints or pictures to go with our presentation, if that's okay.
It's all right. That's all right. Verbal argument without imagery is fine as well. So that's good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hopefully you've enjoyed the preparation and the research and all of that good stuff.
We have. It's truly been a very enlightening experience. We went to topics that we normally just discuss over the surface and tried to look at other points of view.
Good. Oh, I like hearing that. I like hearing that there was a little bit of encouragement of depth of analysis. That's really good.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm intrigued to the proposition I find is one that has a lot of ways to argue for and against. Just the wording of it is not a straightforward kind of wording, but that actually was somewhat intentional to allow a lot of mix of ways that you could approach the conversation.
Right. We hope you enjoy our rendition or our interpretation of
Oh, absolutely. I'm confident that I will. Have you guys seen the format? The young ladies at Woodford were asking about this. The structure will be that both sides will share. You'll have an initial opening for about 10 minutes. And that will be uninterrupted time for you to share whatever it is that you want. So we'll go first with Del Valle, and then after your turn, we'll switch and go to Woodford. And then we'll have about 10 minutes or so where you can, if you will, cross-examine or question or look for clarity from one another. And then we will go back for rebuttals of about 10 minutes for closing, or however long it happens to take you. And then we'll wind up with a closing conversation.
Okay, perfect.
And as kind of preamble to all this, I do want everybody to know, and it looks like we're still waiting for a few people at Woodford, but I'll mention it now, and perhaps again if I see a whole bunch come in. We are streaming this live. I don't anticipate that there are a whole bunch of people tuning into the stream, but I do know that the two classes that debated yesterday at this same time both asked for the stream link today so that they could potentially watch. So there may be some watching. I'm just not sure how many. And I believe we are also recording the session. In fact, I will try to check on that as we wait just a few more minutes.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Can you read it? You want me to again?
So let me give a quick check. Woodford County, I haven't seen anyone else arrive. Are they sitting off camera and you're all set, or should we wait another minute or two for them to arrive? And you will need to, yeah, perfect.
Hi. Yeah, it's all right. We can, because it's mainly going to be us two holding it. So if anyone comes in, they'll just most likely just have to watch anyway, or like at least off camera.
We can give them another minute or two. I think we have time to do that. If you think they're about to arrive, see people pass.
Do you think they're going to come?
I'm not entirely sure.
I'm not entirely sure. Is that?
Well,
We're not entirely sure if anyone is coming.
All right.
So it's all right. I think we can go ahead because it's sort of school has already ended, so people should be coming out pretty much at this moment.
All right, then let's kick it off. We'll go for it. Thank you all, both Woodford County High School in London and Del Valle School in Del Valle, Texas, for joining in on this. I'm really glad that the students are taking part. My name is Renee Carver. It's a pleasure being with you this morning. I'm psyched to do this. And I wanted to note a couple of things before we get underway. I encourage you, both sides, to be very respectful of one another. Avoid offensive language and personal attacks about any of this. Be respectful to all, those who are here in the session as well as those who are not. When you are presenting, please, just for the sake of making the connection, please introduce yourself by first name so that we have that association. That would be wonderful. And finally, along those lines, when someone is presenting, all others involved in the conference should try to refrain from noise. Please do note again that the session is being streamed live and is being recorded. So what you say and what you do is both visible and audio-wise being watched and seen by others. So be aware of that. Today we are arguing the proposition that the world can and must move to clean, non-nuclear renewable energy by the year 2030. Arguing for that proposition is Del Valle High School, and arguing against that proposition is Woodford County. We have selected that Del Valle will present their constructive speech first in favor of that proposition. And with that, I am muting my microphone and leaving it to Del Valle to go ahead.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Brisa Rodriguez-Muro, and today I will be delivering the affirmative constructive for the resolution. We wholeheartedly support this resolution. Resolve: the world can and must have non-nuclear energy, renewable energy by 2030. The keys to this argument are the words world, clean and renewable energy. The word world will imply all countries on our planet. Clean will imply the net benefit of little or no pollution, and renewable will imply that there will be an unlimited resource of this energy. And finally, can and must will be defined as necessary and essential. With these definitions in mind, we would like to turn your attention to the underlying problem with the traditional Western view of renewable energy. It is based largely on the concept that our current energy, oil, is non-renewable and that it's not clean. It is also based on the commonly held belief that oil is a fossil fuel. Since the 18th century, the prevailing theory about the origins of petroleum has begun that petroleum originates from the remains of dead animals, and there are two main mistakes with this idea. First, oil is often called a fossil fuel, the idea that it comes from formerly living organisms. This may have been plausible back when oil wells were drilled into the fossil layers below the level of any fossils. So how could then oil have come from fossils or decomposed former living matter if it exists in rock formations far below layers of fossils and the evidence of formerly living organisms? That's just not a possibility today. Second, petroleum originating from plant matter decayed by bacteria similar to that decay of backyard garden compost piles would resemble a microbial product. Instead, the petroleum is chemically similar to pure hydrocarbon that has been contaminated with that microbial material. That contamination occurred as petroleum seeped upward through rock that is now known to contain enormous amount of bacterial life. In moving upward, petroleum also collected helium, explaining why oil wells are such a rich source of helium. So what does this have to do with the case at hand today? Everything. Time is not the problem, and neither is technology or money. Education is. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. explained it like this: education must also train one for quick, resolute, and effective thinking. To think incisively and to think for oneself is very difficult. We are prone to let our mental life become invaded by legions of half-truths, prejudices, and propaganda. At this point, I often wonder whether education is fulfilling its purpose. A great majority of the so-called educated people do not think logically or scientifically. Even the press, the classroom, the platform, and the pulpit in many instances do not give us the objective and unbiased truths. To save a man from the morass of propaganda, in my opinion, is one of the chief aims of education. Education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the fiction. The problem is that we're not being taught to question or even use the real concept of the scientific method. We are taught to accept facts without proof, and those who question it are diminished into being totally wrong. Outside of the US, the UK, and Canada, it is held as a commonly held belief that oil is both clean and renewable. The US-based notion that oil is not renewable comes from a theory in which it was proposed in the 18th century by Russian scholar-scientist Mikhail Vasilievich Lomosov in 1757. In the late 1940s, when the Soviet military put great pressure on the government to provide secure sources of oil in case of war with the US, the pressure to leave no possibility unexplored overcame the normal resistance to exploring new ideas that challenged currently accepted scientific theories. And by 1951, the leading Russian petroleum scientist Porfiriev was asked to evaluate the new abyssal abiotic theory. He was expected to debunk it because he was the leader of a petroleum establishment and because he had written a leading book on the based on the abiotic theory. In 1956, however, Porfiriev addressed a major Soviet petroleum conference and unexpectedly announced that the abyssal abiotic theory is correct. This is what he said: "The overwhelming preponderance of geological evidence compels the conclusion that crude oil and natural petroleum gas have no intrinsic connection with biological matter originating near the surface of the earth. They are primordial materials that have erupted from great depths." This is proof of our superior definition today. Over the next half-century and continuing into the 21st century, the Soviet and Russian oil industry employed the abyssal abiotic theory of the origins of petroleum to guide exploration efforts. This result is what happened to lead the Soviet Union and later Russia to become, for a time, the largest producer of petroleum and gas and the second largest exporter of these products. There are 7 advantages to our definitions of oil. First, virtually all of the largest oil fields are located near major deep fault zones. Second, since 1955, the Soviets and ex-Soviets modified their exploration practices based on the abyssal abiotic theory. They have found 90 new oil fields, of which 80 obtained part of their oil from crystalline basement rock. This made the Soviet Union the largest oil-producing country in the world, rivaled only by Saudi Arabia. And third, as of the 1990s, the largest of wells in the Persian Gulf have been producing oil under pressure rates of roughly 100,000 barrels per day for 70 years. Neither the pressure nor the daily output declined substantially during that period. This supports the theory that oil comes from huge reservoirs that are indigenous parts of the earth and not from the remains of biotic matter. Fourth, chemical thermodynamics decisively support the abyssal abiotic theory, and thermodynamic calculations show that petroleum chain molecules can form only at pressures and temperatures reached at depths greater than 100 kilometers below the surface of the earth. And the calculations also show that petroleum chain molecules cannot form from biotic chemicals like proteins and carbohydrates, even at a depth of 100 kilometers. Fifth, experiments conducted at very high pressures in the former Soviet Union confirmed the theoretical results, and that is that you can form long-chain petroleum molecules in roughly the proportions found in crude oil from methane at the stated pressures and temperatures. Sixth, the leading argument in support of the biotic theory does not stand up, and this argument claims that only biotic molecules exhibit optical activity. Seventh, Russia was running low on oil in 1946, and after an intensive period of study and debate, the USSR began to drill in areas where the geology was such that oil should have never been found. And instead, the USSR went from being an oil importing country to an oil exporting country. It went from being poor to one of the richest countries that now holds more gold than any other country. Oil was discovered and drilled, pumped and exported at depths way below any previously recorded areas that had no signs of previous sea life or dinosaurs. Oil is not running out, and while we continue to teach this and believe the biotheory, there is no path toward alternative energy, which is why we propose this plan. Adoption of new science-based curriculum, allowing all students the ability to learn more about the abiotic oil theory in all textbooks, teaching that oil is renewable and that we're not running out. Second, the teaching of abiotic oil in all college and university classes of geology. Third, in-service training for all current teachers on abiotic oil. And fourth, a cease and desist on all cap-and-trade programs as well as carbon tax programs that are nothing more than money grabs. Only then can we prioritize the agendas that matter. The truth is that oil companies are not investing or attempting to shift toward clean energy because they get way more money off of oil. In a recent article on Reuters, reported that big oil spent only 1% on green energy in 2018. It revealed that although Europe's top oil and gas companies spend around 1% of their 2018 budgets on clean energy, they greatly outpaced their US and Asia rivals, meaning that they're only doing the bare minimum. In this article, they said, this 1% figure pales in comparison with the amount of money big oil spends blocking the climate initiatives and regulations and invest in fossil fuel projects that have no place in a well below 2 degrees Celsius world. This is a quote from Jean Martin of a campaign group in Share Action. While it seems like big oil companies are starting to take renewable energy seriously, a decade from now, they probably won't be the big energy players they are today. They're just not ready to step away from such a profitable market. The longer people continue to believe that oil is the big lies that are being presented by big oil companies, the longer it will take for them to plan towards a clean plan. In the meanwhile, they will continue their agenda and continue spending on oil rather than on the clean alternative energy. So there is no excuse today to start investing in that clean energy. With better educated electorates, pressure can be put on big oil companies to shift toward the clean alternatives that are so much needed. As a Bloomberg article recently discussed, it can be argued that alternative energy businesses may not necessarily provide the thrills and cyclical upswings, but they do generate steady returns. Oil companies have no excuse to do the right thing except not wanting to. In essence, the only way to support this resolution is to adopt the affirmative plan. I now stand down for questions and pass my remaining time to our opponents. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your arguments and your speech. Woodford County, that's you on the docket.
Okay. Yeah, just need to get the PowerPoint up.
Okay.
And again, at the beginning. Yeah, do we put it full screen, right?
Yeah, that's it. Make it.
From the beginning, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So I can start?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Zara, and I'm presenting the constructive speech on behalf of the opposition team. Now, I really want to redefine what this debate is actually about. So this is the structure of how we're going to discuss this debate. We're going to first begin with defining what actually is clean energy and what this motion entails, what we're supposed to be discussing in this debate. Then we're going to go through our different arguments, why we oppose this motion, and then draw some conclusions regarding our approach to clean energy. So what is clean energy? According to the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, clean energy is derived from renewable, zero emission sources, as well as energy saved through energy efficient. So it's renewable, zero emissions, so no carbon or no methane released, and it's energy efficient. Now, in the motion, it details that the world needs to solely move towards clean energy, and that it can do so. However, the opposition team would argue that it is not at the moment with this technology practical to entirely shift towards renewable energy. Keyword, at the moment. Additionally, the motion explicitly implies that we should solely fund and invest into renewable energy. Why? What is the purpose of funding renewable energy? Well, we would argue that we need to fund renewable energy because we need to abide by the agreements made in the Paris Agreement in 2015 to ensure that the global temperature does not rise above 1.5%. And so thus we agree that we should make a move towards clean energy. However, we strongly disagree that this is the only step we should be taking to dealing with climate change. We believe that solely focusing on clean energy neglects other environmental problems and also neglects the fact that there are many other factors, such as the agricultural industry, that contribute to climate change. So first of all, we want to address the impracticality of entirely shifting towards renewable energy. And with that, we want to present our case for nuclear energy. In understanding the benefits of nuclear energy, we need to understand what nuclear energy actually is. Nuclear energy is power that is derived from nuclear reactions that release nuclear energy to generate heat. This heat is then used to produce steam, which turns turbines, which then produces electricity. The diagram you're seeing on the board was produced by the World Nuclear Association and details the proportion of the total US energy and the sources of which it comes from. At the moment, 10.4% of this energy is produced from nuclear power sources. But how many plants actually produce this energy? Well, you might be surprised to know that only 450 power plants, nuclear power plants, produce this amount of energy. That in itself is a testament to the energy potential of nuclear power. And this energy potential is very important if we're approaching the future because of the energy gap. And it's key to understand what the energy gap actually is. The energy gap is the issue with the demands for energy as we move towards the future. By 2050, it is predicted that there will be a population sizing 9.8 billion people. Even if we were to minimize our use of energy per person, the sheer size, sheer increase in number of people living on this planet will mean that our energy demands will be rising exponentially. As a result, we as a global community have a responsibility to ensure that energy is affordable, so that it's accessible, that we can have access to the energy grid 24/7, and that our use of electricity and our accessing of the electricity grid does not have negative externalities on the environment. And it would appear that only nuclear energy can truly do that, at least at this moment. Because not only does it have an immense energy potential, but it has also low carbon emissions. If you look at the graph that's provided by the World Nuclear Association, the amount of carbon emissions released by nuclear power plants is almost equivocal to other renewable energy sources like hydroelectricity and wind power. Furthermore, taking a more economic stance, nuclear energy provides loads of jobs, countless even. It is estimated that nuclear energy in the US employs 100,000 people directly. This is not accounting for the fact that there are many secondary jobs, which amount to 475,000. Furthermore, there's very limited risk of nuclear accidents. If we reflect on the tragic accident of Chernobyl, that was caused by a lack of regulations. Back then, there was already a lack of regulations, but Chernobyl, the people, the workers at Chernobyl were not abiding by those already very loose regulations. The EDF is a very major energy company in the UK, and in its 45 years of using nuclear power plants, it has not had a single accident because the UK is very strict on enforcing regulations on the nuclear power industry, because we do not want accidents like that to happen. Again, we want to ensure people's safety. And so long as there are strict regulations in place, these accidents are very unlikely to occur. Also, some may argue that nuclear energy would perhaps encourage proliferation of nuclear weapons. However, we would argue otherwise. By using nuclear research in a very productive fashion, in meeting people's energy needs, in ensuring that they have affordable access to energy, we're reframing the view in which we see nuclear energy. We're seeing it as something that's essential to our development, something that won't cause wars, but bring us together. Now I would like to move on to my next point. Perhaps it's not gases and fossil fuels that might be the biggest offenders. Perhaps there's a known villain, the agricultural industry. When we think about carbon emissions, we don't think about the agricultural industry because there's not a direct correlation in our mind between the two, and the media doesn't help that. But it is one of the worst offenders, particularly in emissions of methane, which is 105 times more potent than carbon emissions. Fossil fuels in the meat industry, fossil fuels account for 30% of methane emissions. Just 3% behind that are methane emissions, which comes from livestock farming. So this accounts for cows and goats and chicken. The reason methane is produced is in their digestive system, there are microorganisms, which when they break down the food, release methane in the form of flatulence. The meat industry is a very pressing issue because it has doubled in size since 50 years ago and is now worth $7.6 billion US. With such an immense size, the amount of methane produced per annum is 90 million tons. It is an absurd amount. Yet, if we were to only focus on moving towards renewable energy, we would be completely neglecting a very important aspect of climate change and the carbon emissions that contribute to climate change. Furthermore, food waste is a very pressing issue in regards to climate change. If we were to picture food waste as a country like the UK or Canada, it will be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world, just falling behind China and the USA. And if that doesn't exacerbate the issue enough, if that doesn't prove that we need to be dealing with other issues besides where we get our energy from, it is estimated that 1/3 of all food produced in the world goes to waste. If the US was to reduce its food waste, we would be reducing 11% of methane emissions just by dealing with food waste. Now, I would like to clarify, just take the time now to assure you that we're not against clean energy. We do think it is the way of the future. However, there has not been enough scientific research into the field to show the limits of renewable energy. And it would be too naive to completely pursue with renewable energy without knowing the limits of it and get to a point where we're stuck because we can no longer meet the energy demands of the population, and we're also having negative externalities on our environment, which is what I want to lead us on to now. There's two negative externalities that I want to talk about. One, we have to talk about forest destruction, which is already bad as it is. So forest destruction, what I'm talking about is like deforestation for space for the agricultural industry, deforestation to produce paper. Trees and vegetation act as carbon stores. The Amazon, for instance, is one of the largest carbon stores on this planet. When we burn down these trees, when we log them, the combustion releases greenhouse gases into the air. And perhaps we don't, again, picture deforestation as being a cause of climate change, but it very much is. In Brazil, despite it already having issues with traffic, 75% of their total carbon emissions is down to deforestation. Now, here are what we want to talk about, the limits of renewable energy. And we're going to use two examples of renewable energy, clean renewable energy, hydroelectric power and geothermal power. These have many positives. They don't have barely any greenhouse emitters, yet they destroy the environment around them. Hydroelectric power, for instance. The dams used in hydroelectric power disrupt biodiversity and the ecosystems of wildlife in the area. When the reservoir water is stored behind the dam, the flow of water is more stagnant than the regular river. And what happens is that minerals and sediments gather there and promote the growth of algae, an invasive species. This algae absorbs the oxygen that is meant to be given to, or meant to be received by the fishes. And it disrupts the entire ecosystem, killing native fishes. In regards to geothermal energy, open-loop geothermal systems release air emissions. Particularly, they release hydrogen sulfide. You might know hydrogen sulfide by its very distinct sulfur rotten egg smell. However, when it's released into the atmosphere, it mixes with the rain and acidifies it in the form of sulfur oxide. And it damages lakes, streams, crops. And when it enters our system, it disrupts our human cardiovascular system and causes lung diseases. We see renewable energy as this all-saving grace, the only way of dealing with climate change. However, that is simply not true. By picturing renewable energy in this light, we fail to throw a critical light on it and acknowledge the limits to it. Again, to clarify, we are not against clean energy. However, we're against the fact of solely funding and investing in clean energy as the sole way of dealing with climate change. We should be accounting for the agricultural industry, for deforestation, perhaps using nuclear energy. There is no one solution to any problem, so it would be very ignorant to assume that renewable energy is the sole solution to such a complex problem like climate change. I'd like to end off with a quote from Alex Epstein, the author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. It is commonly assumed that greenhouse gas and energy problems can be solved by switching from fossil fuel resources of energy or renewable energy. However, little attention has been given to exploring the limits to renewable energy. Unfortunately, people working on renewable energy technologies tend not to throw critical lights on the difficulty and limits. They typically make enthusiastic claims regarding the potential of their specific technologies. And that quote summarizes our approach to clean energy. We are very much for it, but perhaps we need to be more critical when dealing with renewable energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for stopping sharing your screen. That is wonderful. At this point, the structure of our time is that the two sides have an opportunity to question and ask for analysis from one another, information, etc. And so I encourage you to do that. We are a small group, so I would encourage you to just leave your microphones unmuted and have a conversation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Should you start?
Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Mahan from Woodford. And I'd like to thank the affirmative score. You had a very convincing argument. But I noticed you, in your argument, you consistently talked about how time, technology, and money are not problems, and education is the main problem. Don't you think that that's a little bit theoretical, too idealistic, and not at all practical, given the situation where currently time, technology, and money are both very major problems?
So my name is Madison. So the entire point of our educational policy argument was due to the fact that we have been pretty much raised and taught on the idea that oil is from fossil fuels and is non-renewable. So at the very beginning of my co-counsel's argument, we discussed how oil is actually renewable and how we need education in order to actually, for a student to actually understand this fact.
And the reason why we ran it as a critique is because, well, as you presented in your speech here, there's a concern over spending. But as I said in my speech, companies aren't really spending as they should. Last year, they only spent 1%. And while 1% may seem somewhat significant, it doesn't even compare to the amount of profit that they're gaining every year from oil. It's exceptionally, it's just something that it's unimaginable to see like how much they're really spending on
Can I count?
Wait, can I just see? Yeah. Okay.
Folks from Del Valle, just so you know, the microphone isn't picking you up really well unless you're close to the front. If there's a way for you to adjust for that, that would be wonderful. And if not, we'll
So
do.
it's going to say that oil
I was going to say oil is not renewable.
Yeah.
Do you want to adjust that or do you want to be?
Wait, okay. We were a bit concerned because you did say that you did spend a lot of time talking about the importance of the renewability of oil, but actually oil is only the second largest, is only our second largest source of energy. We only get 3.7% of our energy from oil. Every other source is bigger: coal, gas, hydro, electric, nuclear, and solar, wind, geothermal, and tidal. And so I kind of felt if you could clear up your argument on what you feel about other sources of energy, that would be quite nice.
So again, just to reemphasize, the whole purpose and goal behind our affirmative argument is to run a critique argument. And the reason why we ran a critique argument is precisely so that we're acknowledging the biggest problem here, in our opinion, as we defined it, which it wasn't really, there was no clash with our definition, so we're assuming that you have affirmed our definition of education being the biggest problem in this round today. And for that reason, we made that a priority to fix so that we can show and demonstrate that there is a path to clean energy by affirming our resolution.
Perhaps, hi, my name's Zara. Perhaps I just want to go back to the idea of oil as a renewable source. Oil, yes, it takes millions and millions of years for oil to sort of be renewed because it takes fossil fuels to decompose and whatnot, right? However, if we sort of take the very standard definition of renewable, is that it's being used at the same rate at which it's being replaced. So I would say it's very quite logical to see that if it takes millions of years to produce oil and only, let's say, a few minutes to use it, then that perhaps contradicts your definition of oil as a renewable energy source.
So, sorry. Can you
Is that true?
Okay. So
Yeah.
we're trying to implement the abyssal abiotic theory, and there was no clash to that argument as well from your side. So again, it's a critique argument. We're presenting arguments that we view through definitional basis, and because there hasn't been a clash by that definitional basis, we're placing that as a truth in this debate. I'm not sure as to why that's. Do you understand like what a critique type argument is?
Perhaps you could clarify, because if I was saying, you said that you're focusing on definitions, but this is a scientific-based debate. So we were expecting statistics, figures. You did use a lot of theory, yes, but it was very historical. When we're looking towards the future, we expect more statistics on that behalf. So perhaps you could clarify what it means by critique-based argument.
See, the problem with, okay, so the reason why we ran it this way is because, as you said, this is looking into the future, and much of the future is theoretical because, again, it's just an appeal to future. That would be a logical fallacy. So we do base a lot of it on statistics, as I presented in my speech, that the current amount of investment that's going on into clean energy by big oil is not necessarily the proper one. They're just doing the bare minimum to keep people off their backs, but they could be doing a lot more. And that's why we prioritize education as the big fundamental error that happens to be going in our society today. Because if people were more aware of the problems that are ongoing, more about how it can put into place as it did in Russia. That was really the reason why I put the Russia contention as my.
And again, Russia, this is the abiotic theory is their science inside of Russia, which is why we use that definition of oil within our argument here today. So we're still
I just want to ask. So I just wanted to ask something. Do you think that perhaps you're focusing a bit too much on the US rather than, as the motion details, the world? currently, as part of the EU, we have the 2020-20 package, which is an EU directive, which basically entails us, although it's not legally binding, it virtually is in de facto, it entails us to not only move towards less greenhouse gases, but to address our environmental impact, the environmental impact of varying industries. So all I'm asking is, because I suppose there's being a UK school and you being based in the US, the figures we used obviously will usually be based on where we come from, but perhaps taking into account the global effort towards clean energy rather than just the US effort, because there seems to be a disparity at least.
So that's actually affirming our critique on as to why we need a better worldview education within this, because we weren't actually just focusing on the US. Again, we were focusing on Russia and many parts of the Middle East, as well as the US. But again, it's just affirming that this is why we need to create a better Western worldview education.
And to add on to the critique argument, the reason why we added the contention that companies as part of my speech said, only 1% of the actual income was spent by Europe's big oil companies, and that greatly outpays their Asia and US rivals. And why we brought it up is because we're trying to show and demonstrate that as much as the public would like to think that oil industry is really trying to shift towards clean energy, the truth is that that's not the case. They could be spending a lot more money on that clean energy, but they'd rather not, because as you pointed out in your speak actually, there's too much risk. These companies grew by investing and risking. That's how they became the superpowers that they are today. And by not investing the amount of money that they spend on clean energy, that's really the only barrier to us reaching our resolution today. And that's why we're trying to make that argument.
Do you want me to stay or do you want to stay? I guess. In regards to the idea of risk, there's an idea between making an educated risk and perhaps taking a baseless risk. Taking risks as companies is about cost analysis, opportunity costs, which every business will weigh up. The opportunity cost of solely focusing on renewable clean energy, is just far too high. What we're suggesting, we're not saying we're against clean energy, we're saying clean energy is the way forward, but perhaps we should go forward with clean energy, perhaps with the bolstering of nuclear energy, and also while addressing the impact of agricultural industries on climate change. So in some ways we are agreeing with you. We're not saying that renewable energy isn't the way forward, but the motion says solely. And that's where we're finding sort of an error with.
To answer to that argument, the problem with the way you're presenting it is that seems to be our worry, our concern, is that the public is content with them just spending the bare minimum to keep people and activists off their backs. That 1% is not enough for us. What we're asking is that they spend a lot more money, because how can they know that it's worth their time, that it's not worth the cost opportunity if they're not necessarily spending enough money?
So we agree that large companies should do far more than they are doing currently, but we also have to take into account that they would be taking much less of a risk if they were to switch to nuclear energy, because you have to understand that solar energy and wind energy and tidal energy, none of those are reliable. They're not regular, especially in the UK. The sun is not something we can trust. So, and because of that, don't you believe that that's one of the reasons why perhaps some companies have been less eager to focus their energy fuels from purely clean sources?
Could I ask a question?
Oh yeah, sure. Ask us a question.
Do not say that if
we can't hear you.
Sorry. If it's a cost.
So do you mind repeating? Yeah.
So when it comes to nuclear energy, it's not necessarily safe you can't assure 100% that it's going to be safe. We've had events in the past, like for example, Chernobyl, which ended up in a terrible disaster. And if truly all the companies want to look at our risk factors with money, then are you proposing that money is more important than human lives?
No, actually. So I'd like to address two of those points. So Chernobyl was a terrible accident, but that wasn't because of nuclear energy. That was because of a lack of regulation. And in countries where there has been proper regulation, for example, the UK, there hasn't been an accident ever. And another thing I'd like to address is we agree that more profits should be spent on renewable energy. It's just that sometimes the economic disincentive, there could be a potential economic disaster for some of those companies. They could collapse, and that would in turn risk far more jobs, far more damage to the local economies, as well as countrywide economies. And because of that, of course, human lives will be affected by climate change, but at the same time, human lives will very heavily be affected by the economics of it. And so we need to balance those in order to come to the correct solution.
So to build on Mahan's point, we have to basically, what you say is we have to focus on the socio-economic impacts of how we incentivize businesses. After all, these are businesses, not the government. The government's purpose is in our best interests. That is the government's purpose. But the purpose of businesses, which you learn like as the fundamental core of economics, is to make profit. Now, perhaps governments could subsidize clean energy, but we can't expect them of their own will to just take absurd risks by solely moving towards clean energy. Perhaps moving towards clean energy would be less of a risk if they could invest more in nuclear energy. Is what we're suggesting. Increase spending and increased investment into clean energy, while also in tandem increasing investment into nuclear energy and addressing the impact of the agricultural industry.
But that's still not
Both sides, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm very, very sorry to interrupt because I love hearing the discussion and watching the engagement and the participation. You're all presenting wonderful arguments, but in the interest of trying to have adequate time to wrap it up, I'm going to close this piece and talk slowly so that Woodford knows that they should prepare for the rebuttal argument. You will be going first. I will give you, I think we have both schools willing to go over. Can I confirm that you're willing to go? I've got about 20 minutes left in our allotted time. If you're both willing to go beyond that, then I will leave it at 10 minutes and we'll 10 minutes. Is that confirmed that you can go past another 20 minutes?
20 minutes taking us up to 1:30. Yeah?
Yeah.
Or is it 20 minutes beyond the session, Renee?
You guys can only go till 4:30 UK time?
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Then I will ask that both sides try to shorten their rebuttals to about 5 to 7 minutes, and we'll go from there. Woodford, go ahead.
Okay.
Are you right? Okay. Hi, I'm Marham, and I understand some of the concerns that the affirmative school have given, but I'd like to address some of the arguments that they've said. So they said that time, technology, and money are not the problems, education is the problem, and we agree to an extent. But we have to look at the basic economics of it and the consequences that could have. Time, technology, and money are integral to getting to clean energy. And because of, or not just to clean energy, but to stopping and preventing further climate change. But we agree on the education level, but education as consumers. So for example, we believe that consumers can consume less meat. That would solve a big issue in terms of climate or in terms of global warming. If consumers were to consume less meat, then obviously the supply would decrease naturally, and because of that, there would be less methane emissions. We believe that consumers are integral to changing the types of energy sources we use, because there are actually new energy companies opening up in the UK that claim to use energy solely from clean sources, and education is obviously a big part of that. But also, one of the things we'd like to address is the fact that there hasn't been as big of a move to electric cars as we'd like there to have been, and that's also vital to preventing anything that's bad for the climate as well as the environment. For example, in London, most premature deaths are actually mostly caused by pollution from cars and not anything to do with climate change. And so that pollution by cars, if that was addressed rather than energy sources, then that would have a bigger impact on the quality of people's lives and how long people live. And so we believe finally that it shouldn't be just the role of the consumer either. It should be larger companies, but the consumers are integral to that, and also the government. And the overall, our clean energy is vital, but it's not the sole thing that can help us to counter climate change. There are elements that are actually far greater. For example, deforestation or agriculture or pollution by petrol and diesel cars. And that's why we'd like to disagree with the proposal of the affirmative score. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your arguments. Valle, it is up to you at this point to offer your rebuttal. Please go ahead. We'll give you about 7 minutes up to. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Lance Belderell, and I'd like to start off by saying that the rebuttal should only acknowledge arguments made in the first speech. Therefore, I state that all points made concerning and addressing the critique that we have shared today were not done in the prior speech and are therefore dropped for this debate. And I would like to start the rebuttal by defining our previous argument as a critique on the resolution, meaning that we simply focused the point of this debate into talking about education and to redefining how we learned all kinds of things about renewable energies, and mainly about our stance on oil, in which we define world as all countries, clean as net benefit of little pollution, renewable as unlimited resource of energy, and can as necessary. And therefore, we defined oil as we defined oil as a renewable energy in our debate and in our critique. Therefore, the examples that we've made do fit under the definitions of going to a renewable and going to a clean, non-nuclear energy. And furthermore, to address points made in our critique, we have focused on education primarily because it is the barrier through which companies will be able to focus on renewable energies, in which the general populace would need this type of critical thinking in order to allow all of these shifts in companies and in order to allow all these changes in minds. And what I mean by this is, with the previous example of Russia, as said before, they were only importing oil. They only had an importing oil industry, in which once they had a new head of education, they changed that state of mind. And as you can see, we've brought up that they've changed into an exporting oil industry. So on that socioeconomic point that you guys have made before, I would like to say that it fully supports our critique, and that education change would primarily make companies more oil and more renewable, because people have more critical analyses of these kinds of situations. And now, one more point I'd like to make before finishing off is a side point. They talked about climate change previously in their points. However, I would like to address that is another linking statement they made without concrete proof, and they haven't linked anything to oil being the cause of that climate change, or oil even emitting gas emissions. And as I've noted down here, oil was never linked to be from fossil fuels, and they have not contended that. So therefore, that is the truth that we have in today's argument. The fact that oil is not a fossil fuel, oil has not been linked to it, and oil therefore does not cause any emissions, as it not being defined as a fossil fuel. Thank you.
Well, those rebuttals went much quicker than I anticipated. Thank you both for that. I have enjoyed listening to your arguments and the way you've presented them, and it's always interesting to me to hear how different high schools frame and phrase what it is, how they take this challenge on. It's obvious that both groups have some experience in the debate process, and Del Valle, I think in particular, are you guys all involved in a debate class?
Yes, yes, we are, yes.
Okay, so this is literally a class exercise for you, is that true?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and Woodford County, for you, my recollection from engagement with Danielle prior is that for you, you have a discussion club where you engage in creative discussion about topics, but not really a formal debate club. Is that true?
We have a debate society, but we focus on like British parliamentary, MACE, World Schools debate rather than US formats of debate.
Right.
It's good
Okay.
to
And this was generally framed around a structure that I found. I think that your teachers had the structure in email as we promoted this. A policy debate or cross-examination debate that I had discovered from a Cornell University website. So that's how I tried to work with people to frame the debate. I think it would be wonderfully enjoyable to do this in a way or structure some of these in a way that we actually were able to declare a winner. And the obvious intent of this is that we help students inform themselves, creatively inform themselves about how we go forward as a world society to create a viable future. So hopefully in that process, despite the fact that you needed to argue your perspective, you also gained some additional knowledge. So this then, if we do have about another 8 minutes or so before the Woodford County ladies need to depart, this is informal conversation, so I invite you to ask questions beyond the structure of the debate.
For Del Valle, we're just very interested in like the fact that you have a debate class, because it's not really something that we have as part of like a curriculum or part of like as a school day. So we're just like wondering like what do you like debate within your class structures, or like what types of things you address within your class, like the activities that you have.
Well, one of the things that we actually do prepare for is a type of national competition that we have here. One of those competitions would be Youth and Government for the YMCA, which that type of competition that we're in is called Moot Court.
Google case. We actually received an actual case in the territory and it's not really similar to this format. They do a lot of like policy and medical debates. Like tomorrow we're debating against Canada.
Yeah.
We're debating or whether or not and if that's the primary motivation that drives will be interesting. What sort of topics do you guys think?
Good luck.
Yeah.
What's the structure of their argument then?
Do you mind repeating yourself? It didn't pick up.
There's a lot of background noise in the different places that I think are overriding the good connection of audio.
So, asking what kind of topics do you guys discuss in your club?
It's mostly kind of the generic one. So we had a strange one, which was, should women over 50 be allowed to have children? And but also, I think generally we discuss stuff like the death penalty and abortion, that kind of thing.
It's more focused around like current affairs, I would think.
Yeah,
so we have one like
affairs.
Shamima Begum, which is like a really big thing in the UK at the moment, at least I would say so. But you'd be sort of
You probably need to explain who she is.
oh yeah, I forgot that is perhaps not a big thing. She was at the age of 16. She left the UK. Or 15. She left to join ISIS. So she, with 2 other girls, left to join ISIS. And then 2 of them, I believe, died. I think
We think they're dead. We're not entirely sure.
and then she married, I think, a man from Denmark.
The Netherlands.
Yeah. And she wanted to return back to the UK under her, and still maintain her UK citizenship. And there was a whole discussion over whether her UK citizenship should be revoked because she joined a terrorist organization. And they ended up revoking her revoking her citizenship.
And it was made even more complicated because she had a child.
Yeah.
And especially because you can't leave a citizen without citizenship. And also, which country did the child belong to? Was it Syria, the UK, Netherlands? No one really knew. So we had to have that debate.
Is Brexit? You talk about Brexit?
No, we haven't got to that one yet. But Brexit's a big thing, so that's coming up.
Have you discussed?
Is Brexit really going on?
I don't think even the politicians know, to be honest.
No one knows.
What do the Americans think of it?
Actually, yeah.
What do you guys think of Brexit?
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this. Do you think Britain would be better off without the EU?
Okay, so I study politics.
I don't think so.
I think they would, because I basically, in politics, we study like EU law, and we just discuss the matter of sovereignty over law. So basically, when the EU passes regulations or directives, they have to be enforced as law. And one of the principles of our constitution is parliamentary sovereignty, that parliament can make laws on any area, any matter, that these laws can be amended, that it doesn't bind their successors. And the whole idea of EU law preventing Parliament from making laws on any other matters sort of goes against one of the central pillars of our constitution. We don't have much to our constitution besides the rule of law and parliamentary sovereignty. So if you sort of just take out parliamentary sovereignty, there's almost half of our constitution, or half of the principles of our constitution are invalidated. I think I less agree with the idea of immigration. I don't think I agreed with the rhetoric of UKIP at all.
But I'm the other half of the country.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I think it was an unsensible decision, and it definitely shouldn't have been left up to the people. I mean, I understand that democracy is quite cool, especially in America, but over here we have a whole different first past the post system. It's not real democracy in a sense. And I think a lot of the electorate wasn't entirely sure what any of it meant anyway. We're still not sure. And I don't think any of the politicians were sure, so because of that, I don't think it was a good decision.
Can you ask them if this debated society takes them somewhere? Are they interested in following law, or are they policy makers?
Wait.
Say again?
Yeah, what's going to happen to your prime minister? How long do you think she'll stay in office?
She'll stay out most likely until Brexit finishes, whenever that is.
She enticed everyone by, she said, if you vote for me, if the politicians vote for her deal, she'll leave. So she managed to get a few votes that way.
Oh, that's a bit of a joke.
This is a career choice.
PM. Who's going to be the next PM?
We don't even know.
Some very unsavory people. They're not going to be nice people.
Is that just, are you making that statement that anyone who becomes PM is unsavory?
No, it's just that there are so the people close to the Prime Minister or who might likely be Prime Minister, they're not the nicest people.
I like Sajid David, you know, the Home
I
Secretary.
don't like him. Sorry.
I think there are politicians that we do like because we do have like a multi-party system at the moment. But the people we really like, the figures you'd want to be Prime Minister, are in parties that don't really ever have a realistic chance of like getting into power, at least under first past the post. So the people that sort of will likely get into power aren't really favourable to anyone.
Yeah. Or they just leave. David made a band.
David Cameron.
What's the chance of
So,
Boris
Not big fans. Are you a big fan of Boris Johnson? Not really.
I read his book, actually, one of his books. It was interesting. He had no real argument, but he just carried on waffling.
He's a bit incompetent as like every role he did. I think as the Mayor of London, he did good, but perhaps as Foreign Secretary, not so good.
Yeah.
Ask a question, Mum.
Yeah.
So, wait, you have a debate society in your school, right? Is debate like a good way for people in America to get into law? Is it like a law society?
Is it part of like career choices? Would you say that? What is the like reason behind like taking part in debate?
Well, here our high school, like here in our state, we have what we call an endorsement, and we have to choose one at the beginning of our high school career. And so, if we like, for us, me actually, I wanted to start a path towards law, and that's really why I signed up for a lot of the debate classes, like public speaking, foreign diplomacy, intro to law. It's several classes, right? And right now we're in practicum as our senior year, which is like the highest.
So yeah, after 4 years of different debate classes, we get to take practice.
Yeah, I want to caution both sides that the UK is mammoth, the US is mammoth. So do not attribute the fact that Del Valle has a debate society and that they're encouraging people in that way to be.
Hello, Renee.
Oh, he's gone.
No.
Renee's gone. Sit down.
Yeah, he dropped.
Yeah,
It's fine.
Where's Renee?
Oh, God.
I'll let me message him. Hang on, I'll tell him we've lost him. I've got him on WhatsApp.
Do tell us, carry on until
carry
Renee
on.
comes back.
Well, we do what we call appellate court. It's not trial court or moot court, but it's what happens after trial, where we take a case, we look at the procedural mistakes, look at codes from our actual laws, and then we present a speech trying to defend or continue to prosecute the defendant, basically.
And then we also do international criminal court.
Oh wow, that's nice.
And that was a pretty.
Do you want an invite to that one then?
Yeah, I love it. In fact, international criminal court.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. What do you think of Trump? I just asked it.
I don't like him.
Yes, you can come in, Renee.
Liberal here in Austin, and Texas is really conservative, so much of what you hear would probably not be what they would say.
Yeah.
And the country is very divided. We'll just put it that way. And I've never seen it so polarized in my life. But you were calling some of the people divisive there in England. I'd assume the same would be over here. And you can't get one side to say anything nice about the other, vice versa.
A lot of the problem is social media and even the media, like news, basically choosing sides, polarizing the popular idea, and basically what people get to see or know on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. It's just become a little more difficult.
Yeah.
We just came from the White House. We were in Washington, D.C. Freddie and I, we were in Washington, D.C., and we were there 2 years ago. And they have increased the security even in the last 2 years. They put up 3 more fences.
I was there last year.
And it's got to where you can't even go around the White House anymore. And there used to be, I remember when you could drive right in front of the White House. And now today they have things in our countries have changed completely.
It's funny how we're both going through the same.
Yeah.
We're both going through the same flux.
Yeah.
Would you guys
Thank you, Renee.
That I had to restart my computer. And I really regret it because one of the things I wanted to do was thank both sides again for participating and for your thoughtful preparation. Thank you. It's been a pleasure having you on board and engaged for this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Renee.
Thanks for
Renee.
Ask Martin where we can get the recording. Where will the recording? Oh, great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Belle.
Have a great life.
Bye.
Are you?